Welcome everyone to the afternoon session, Shoreline Erosion. What are my BMP or best management practice options? I'm Madeline Roberts and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded and to type your questions into the chat box on the bottom of your screen. And I'm going to wait until the end of the presentation to ask our speakers questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. It's my pleasure to introduce Stacy Dehne and Travis Tulowitzky. Stacy has a degree in geological engineering from UW-Madison and is a licensed professional engineer. Her work experience is in hydrogeology, geology, project management, and activities to protect and manage soil, groundwater, and surface water resources. Stacy is currently employed as an engineer for the Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection in Park Falls, where she is responsible for technical assistance to County Land and Water Conservation Department staff in 14 counties, overseeing the design and construction of various projects, including shoreline protection. Travis has a degree in natural resources from Fox Valley Technical College. His work experience includes 5 years at Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources in groundwater and source water protection. He also has a combined 16 years of experience in Bayfield County in planning and zoning and land and water conservation. Currently, the land and water conservation experience includes technical design and project oversight of wetland restorations, agricultural best management practices, shoreline and stream bank stabilization. And with that, I will turn it over to Stacy and Travis.
Thanks, Madeline. This is Stacy, and I'm going to start it out, and then I'll be pivoting our screen to get you over to Travis when it's his turn. So thanks for having me. I've been asked to talk about just different shoreline restoration techniques, and I wanted to just share with you some of the different projects that we've worked on over the years in northern Wisconsin. When we start thinking about the different techniques and what the possibilities are and what type of materials are out there, I just want to share some before and after photos and then give you an idea of over the years what the projects have looked like. So the various techniques or combination of techniques that we've used in the past range anywhere from just native plantings and trying to augment Mother Nature's plantings, all the way up to structural protection, such as rock riprap, or different man-made procedures that we can put structurally at the shoreline. One of the first things we promote is just trying to leave your shoreline as natural as possible to begin with, only opening up areas or having access to your lake in small pathways or with your dock for access, and leaving what Mother Nature's put there alone. That's kind of our best technique. As everyone probably on this call knows, native soils or native plant materials have far better root structure than the non-native. So when you do a lot of mowing near your shoreline, you're taking away some of that root structure that's helping to hold the sediment in place, and you're kind of opening up yourselves and your shoreline to some erosion potential by mowing. We tend to do some plans that simply involve shrub or tree or ground cover plant areas. If there's already some kind of protection at the toe, just coming in and trying to repair the buffer or restore the buffer area. We tend to do that often, or we promote that type of idea. We've also in the past tried some of the bioengineering techniques, one being a biolog at the shoreline. And what we've really learned is it's a very good technique, but it needs to be only used in places that are rather protected with really small fetch distance, or not a lot of wind-driven waves coming at your shoreline. And we've also had some concerns with ice. Our Wisconsin winters tend to have some pretty heavy ice conditions, and that has caused a little bit of trouble with biologs. So just cautioning that biologs are in a place that is usually pretty protected, and getting the established vegetation is the key for long-term success there. Brush mattresses you see here in this photo are placed perpendicular or along the slope, and they can be successful if you've got a open area and some decent plant materials. This picture is showing them actually being used on a river. And rivers are a little bit more open to the type of brush with willows, willow structures. A lot of times lake shores, it's a limiting factor with landowners not wanting such heavy structure like brush mattresses coming up. Live machines are a similar technique. They run parallel to the shoreline. Also, probably more typical in a situation where you don't have access to the water body right there. Again, this photo is showing it on a river. Branch box breakwaters, really we haven't done a lot of these. It's just not been permitted and not necessarily too sightly there. Different drawings that we have available can be found on the NRCS webpage, just kind of conceptual ideas of what these different techniques would look like when you're drawing them or putting them in a design plan. A vegetated geo grid is something that we have commonly used when we have pretty steep slopes above the lake bed toe, and it just helps to reestablish vegetation in a situation where you can't have a slope that's 3-to-1, where you need to be more vertical or more 1-to-1. Another technique that accomplishes that same idea is geotextile bag wall. And these are just showing kind of what the different connectors and bags might look like. Here's a schematic. When you're building this bag retaining wall, you're placing live plant material as you build it. So it eventually is entirely covered and you really wouldn't even know it's there. And I'll have some photos of that coming up. Here are the bags going in. On the left, you can see a photo. Initially, the bags were manufactured as black fabric or geotextile material, and you'll see in some of my photos later that they started making them tan, and the reason is the tan blends in more aesthetically, but more critically, the black bags absorb too much of sunlight and they tended to fry the plant materials. So by making the bags tan, they're reflecting a little bit more of the sun and not baking our plants. Vegetated riprap is also something that we promote, just trying to camouflage the rock and trying to get it to blend in more with the natural surroundings on your lake. We've done it a couple ways. You see in here is live stakes that are just punctured or pierced through the rock cross section. Another way that we have accomplished vegetating our riprap is by placing a geotextile bag vertically. If you can see my cursor up in the rock cross section, just pulling out a few of the rocks and placing a vertical sack in there with the plant material, then planted into the soil within the bag. And just on the bottom, you can see 3 species that we've had some good luck with establishing in the rock cross section using the bags vertically. This is a photo showing that very thing. One of the first times we tried it, we actually were able to go back to the same parcel and pull the bags out and check just to prove. You see that there is quite a bit of root growth and the roots were able to puncture through that fabric, and they really do knife through and seek out the soil in the bank at the back side of the rock. So it's a good long-term solution, and the plants can really establish with that vegetated bag in there. Some before and after examples of projects, just to share some photos with you. And trying to, again, go with the theme of just looking at planting all the way up to more structural. So here's just a buffer project that was done. You can see we tend to leave this 15-foot building envelope around cabins. It's a fire condition that you at least have 15 feet clear around a building. But then the rest of this area was able to be planted. And here you see that same project or that same site just showing the buffer plantings up and above the lake or lakeshore area there. Another one, just to give you an example, sometimes you don't have a lot of room to work. Whoops, sorry about that. This one you can see is along a town road, and it happens to be Amnicon Lake. But being that there was a limited area that you could work with, we needed to make sure that we stabilized the road. So the toe of the structure is some rock and boulder material here, but then just that very little width that we had left, we wanted to get planted and established. And because it's a road, you can see that we didn't have a lot of trees, or you had to be careful of sight distance for travel there. So we kind of focused on some smaller grasses to make up that planting. Another project, or another thing that we run into quite often, is existing seawalls, and being able to go in and look at removal of these old failing seawalls and replacing with something that can revegetate and become more natural on the landscape. This project, you can tell in the upper right photo, is on a flowage. So the flowage is drawn down at this particular time of construction, but we were able to remove the timber wall that was failing. And also you can tell that what was happening is that the waves are crashing up against that timber seawall and causing these scour or these splash areas behind it. So we were able to come in and look at a rock riprap project. Because of the fluctuating water levels, it's pretty difficult to work with a lot of plant materials in that zone of water level fluctuation. Not a lot of plants do well with that, maybe short of some willows. This happened to be a resort, so willows weren't something that they favored. And then we were able to do a planting plan up above the rock, kind of where my cursor is showing you. I'm afraid I just don't have a photo to share of that final planting, but there was a buffer planting established up and above the rock after the rock replaced that seawall. This project is a really good example of trying to incorporate some tree revetments or tree drop ideas in amongst the rock riprap. So the before picture in the upper left kind of sees some of the existing erosion, or what was happening, mostly from a lot of wave action, primarily boating in this particular location. But then at the bottom right photo, this is during the planting itself. And if you take a look on the far left here, you can see these tree drops that were incorporated within the rock cross section. So that helped to break up some of the wave energies, but it also added to some habitat in that location as well. And then a couple more photos just showing the progression of the planting establishment. So up here is about 1 year later that you see. Also maybe take note again of these tree drops in amongst the rock. And then at the bottom right, this is probably with maybe a couple years growth, a couple seasons. And there again, you see the trees in amongst the riprap. Another project, this actually happens to be one of the very first projects that we attempted using those geotextile bags to create the retaining wall in front. And this landowner, as you can imagine, was concerned about these red pines where all of the roots were so exposed on the shoreline. So we did propose these geotextile bags, and were able to stack up in front. And every time we built a course of these bags, you would backfill behind them. So you were filling in to cover the root system. And so we didn't destroy or cut any of those roots that were exposed. We just attempted to cover them and fill around them. And one thing I would point out with this project that we learned, you see these bags are literally placed on the lake bed during a drawdown period. And we've learned over time, particularly from this project, that that is not a good idea, or that we need to have some better foundation. So from this point on, you'll see that the projects that we put bags in, we certainly would have a rock toe for the start or for the foundation of any bag wall. And also you see on this photo, these stakes that are sticking out of the bags. We had tried, this project was installed, the bags were installed in November, and we tried to leave placeholders to come back and plant later during the spring, and just lived and learned in the sense that it's really not effective to do that, because we really need to be able to have the plant materials on site and the timing such that you're building the wall at the same time you're able to place the plants. So over time, we went back, this is the same project, went back and put a biolog in front to try to establish a little bit better scour protection of those bottom bags on the lake bed. And again, with the lack of vegetation during building the wall, we came back and hydroseeded the face of those bags. And that's why you see this grass growing at the front here. So a couple other projects later, you'll see that we've gotten far better at putting the plant plugs in during the wall installation, as well as placing the rocks as a foundation for the bag wall. Here's another, this is the same project. Again, the lessons learned. So you see this biolog, or you see the stakes, because the biolog was not successful with the tremendous wave action at this location. Whoops. And on the bottom left, you can kind of see some settlement in the bag wall. So you're seeing, because we didn't have the foundation of rocks, that you're seeing some slumping in this bag wall. So I would say that it's not the ideal situation as far as success on this bag wall, but I will still say that it did a tremendous job of protecting those tree roots. So you can look at it as, you know, a success in a sense of reestablishing protection in front of those red pines, but just that we learned some better techniques with the foundation and the planting of a bag wall. So you'll see that in some future projects. Here's another project where we have a biolog at the base, and this particular site had a patio up top here where my cursor is, and it was delivering quite a bit of runoff right along the stairs. Not uncommon. I think you see that quite a bit on some of our lake parcels. So without being able to change that patio or that runoff coming down the slope, what we really wanted to do was just break up the path and slow that water down on its way down the slope. So we were able to put in some sediment logs coming down. You see the stairs here in this photo, and making a break and a shelf, if you will, for a planting area. And then this material is back graded. So as soon as the runoff hits this area, it's kind of forced to pond and infiltrate. And then the planting would also take some of that moisture up. So protecting runoff or upland flows on the way down to the lake. This is that same project, probably 3 to 5 years later would be my guess. Have some vegetation, you know, quite a bit grown up. You can still see the biolog down here. Again, as far as the biolog is concerned, there was some lake levels increasing. We had some drought years, and then we had some pretty high water years. And when the water levels increased, it submerged that biolog, and then it kind of took its toll on that log. So there was trouble when the water levels covered it. So again, the biologs have to really be assessed as far as the type of location that you're trying to apply them in, and being very careful about water level fluctuation and ice issues. This is another new, different project, and you can see a pretty steep slope here and some sloughing on the way down, the access with the stairs. Just looking at different practices again to break up the runoff coming from up above, as well as stabilize the toe. And this is showing that geogrid that I mentioned earlier. So we have a rock toe for the protection at the lake bed. And then as soon as we get to the elevation of the top of rock that's allowed for the permit, we've started building the vegetated geogrids. And these are about 1 foot in height. So each of these wraps is 1 foot tall, and they're anchored into the back of the bank. And you wind up building these with a 2x12 form on the face. So you'd put your 2x12 across and get everything anchored in, and then you put your fabric down, and you're literally wrapping it back like a burrito and building the soil, compacting soil and building your way up, and also planting as you go. You can see the plant materials about every foot in this geogrid. This particular planting on this photo is showing these live stakes, or probably primarily willow, some dogwood that you see going along as we built the geogrid. And this is showing after, so you can kind of see the growth, or probably only at one growing season. but eventually you should not be able to tell that those geogrid lifts are there. They're holding your soil and they're making it so that soil can sit at a steeper than 3-to-1 slope. But over time, it should camouflage with the vegetation that you don't even know they're there. Here's another site where quite a bit of erosion on the face of it, the slope, a little bit of upland runoff certainly coming down here. And we did geogrid lifts again on this one. So instead of live stakes, you can see some rather larger shrubs were planted in amongst the lift. There's a side view of that. And then the after photos. What we did struggle with on this one was, you know, a lot of the grasses took, but there weren't a lot of shrubs when we came back. This was monitored maybe in a 6 or 8 year period after the project. So these photos are quite a bit after it was installed, and you just don't see a lot of shrubs, but the grasses took off. So important when you're working with the planting plan, folks, that they have a good diversity of material to be tried out there. I think a lot of the shrubs that were placed were the same, and there just must have been some mortality. And without having a different, or the diversity of choices, we didn't have a lot of shrubs that survived. Here are some live stakes waiting to be put in a geogrid lift. This one I wanted to show in the end here. There's a pretty decent picture. It's just downstream of a dam. So this parcel had, probably a couple 100 feet, and the bank is pretty steep coming down. So the rock toe and then doing these lifts again. One thing I would mention on this one, we did actually propose these geogrid lifts all the way to the top of the slope, which is probably 13 to 15 feet in height. And come to find out that the price tag was just too much for this landowner to accomplish. So we did end up cutting the number of lifts in half, meaning we only went about halfway up the slope and vegetated on a steeper grade above that. And I mean, it worked out in the long run, just to give you the idea that these are pretty flexible as far as how you place them. And you can still have success even if you don't go to the very top of the slope. So one other thing to point out is that you try to leave existing vegetation alone. You can see this is a more mature tree here and some already in place that you work around when you're building these geogrids. So we don't want to take away existing vegetation. We want to work around it as you're building them. And this is kind of the overview of what you see here. So the dam, the 200 feet of property here. And as I said, we were not able to maintain or continue going up the top of the slope. We were trying to probably make it to this shelf. And so we had to cut it in half for financial reasons, but still quite a bit more stable than it was in the past when you have this toe protection and a shelf here now to help stabilize that slope. Another parcel where, again, pretty sandy soils. The majority of these I'm showing you, by the way, are all sandy soil type. So considering, you know, what to try there. This is an experimental site where we were allowed by the DNR to work with a wrap, if you will. This is a wrap of rock. So the rock is a smaller size beneath here. And it's wrapped up in this inlet kind of, it's called type FF fabric. It's what they use on stormwater inlets to prevent sediment from getting into a stormwater drain. And so that was the toe of this project. And then it went up into bags again. And you can see the geogrid or a little bit of a wrap here on the bottom 2 bags. And then the rest of the bags are just normal planting up above. And the reason that we did this was the difficulty of getting the size rock that was required in our design to this location. The steep slope, and it was really well vegetated. We couldn't come at it from up above. And the cost of transporting really large rock on a barge. So the contractor was able to transport the smaller size rock and encase it in this bottom toe protection. Again, this is kind of what it looks like, a different side view. And we've not done this since. I think it was kind of an anomaly. I don't know that I'd say, you know, one way or the other. I think people would have a have their own opinion maybe on the aesthetics of it. I would just say again that something that has been done has certainly stabilized the slope better than it was before. I think the jury would still be out on if somebody thinks that this wrapping at the toe looks any better or worse or different than the normal rock riprap. So I'll leave that up to you. And again, it's not been tried or done since. Okay, this is one I wanted to share just because you can kind of see the main lake body out here in the background, and this being a pretty protected bay. And this is where it was successful to use a biolog because it is so much more protected and not open to the main wave action on the main lake. A little hard to see in these photos, but biolog placed in this bay area. Here's an upland runoff issue. The lake levels were low again during those drought years. It typically is up in here, and we're probably about 4 feet out and down in a seepage lake. And so placing these bags again in the upland, in an upland sense, and maybe pointing out again the flexibility of how these bags can be installed and kind of the landscaping maybe effect even of putting in these bags and making it a more natural looking slope. Over time, again, you don't even notice that the bags are there. You can tell in this case that the lake came back up, get a little hint of that stairway over here. So the lake levels have recovered. And looking at it just after construction with vegetation and seeing it over time, and this is the same parcel, just showing it vegetated. Sorry, I got mixed up there. So you can't really even see these bag walls. So eventually that's what we're trying to do to accomplish, is camouflaging the bags and just having the vegetation. Here's another one with upland bags, quite a few of them as you see, but just the difference in a growing season or two, what this looks like after construction versus, you know, a couple seasons later is quite amazing. You definitely don't see the bags. Then we get into some of the matting materials that we use, like here for a boat landing. This was called Grass Protect. It's a pretty rigid plastic roll material blanket, and it was planted with some strawberries to try to spread around and allow for this owner to pull up some kayaks and canoes into this landing area. There's a little bit of a close-up of that fabric and a little bit of rock to help hold it in at that water soil interface. Another fabric that we've used is called Anchormat. Again, just a turf reinforcement matting, making sure that we trench it in on the upstream side. And this is where that matting is in place. This is a canoe landing at a camp, so quite a bit of traffic. I'm afraid I don't have the after of that one, but as far as I know, it's holding up fine. And Stormax is another product that we've used. You can kind of see here, you place it down in contact with the soil, you put some soil on top, and then you seed it and put an erosion blanket on top of it. And of course, at that, again, water to soil interface, you're always gonna have a little bit of exposure of that mat here. But over time, it starts to collect organics and hopefully turn into just a grassy frontage as you see it on either side of that. And haven't been back to that one that I can't share an after photo. And here's what we don't do. So I think that brings me to the end of my description or my talk. And I did want to say that coming up in one of the next sessions, Dave Ferris from Burnett County and a couple others are going to be sharing more in looking at how you determine your erosion or what's causing your erosion, because that's certainly important to understand. And then they're looking at some of the permitting aspects and things of what you may choose to do based on that. So that'll be coming up in the next session. And I will stop sharing this screen and get us over to Travis Tulowitzky next. You're not. Sorry.
Yep. Okay, thank you, Stacy. As Madeline said earlier, I'm Travis Tulowitzky. I'm the Bayfield County Technician for the Land Conservation Office. So I'm pretty excited to go through this next section. Madeline, please cut me off if we run out of time. I know I have just probably about 15 minutes, but what I hope to get out of this or share with you is a publication that we've been working on. And how this came about was probably I think it's been 3 years now in receiving a request for information from a Lake Association member who I believe is actually listening in on this call. So I'm going to give Jim Bakken some credit here, who reached out to us a few years ago looking for basically information that could be shared with landowners, lakeshore property owners regarding shoreline erosion, because Lake Association received calls and requests for help, as well as land conservation offices. And because I work pretty closely with Stacy, especially on county projects, I asked if there was a publication that refers to just to stabilization methods. There's a lot of great publications on shoreline restoration, native plantings, but is there something out there that just specifically addresses stabilization methods, just that essentially what Stacy's talk has been? And we found that there wasn't anything available in the state. I asked Pat Goggin and members of DNR looking for such a information that could be shared. So in the research, we found that we couldn't find anything specific to the work that Stacy and the land conservation offices have been doing, but we did find documents or publications that were available in other states. Minnesota has a great publication referring just to stabilization. New York and Georgia. So we found other states that have a similar document. So I am going to caution you, this still is unfortunately in draft form. The final might actually be completed today. There was a couple additions that were being made, I believe today, and we're hopefully going to have this to print in July. So I haven't shared this publicly, or we haven't shared this publicly yet. And so I'm basically, this is a draft and this is an introduction to what is to come hopefully by midsummer. So this publication, like I said, started about 2.5 years ago. It's work that has been a collection of what Stacy has worked on with multiple northern counties. There were 11 land conservation offices involved in this project. Stacy, like I said, was involved in this project, as well as Pat Goggin. And it's been a project of over the course of 2.5 years, with many in-person meetings before COVID and many virtual meetings during the pandemic. So it is definitely a collection of a lot of great projects and work that has been going on over the years, and hopefully that we can share and provide to the general public. So a little bit about this. Like I said, we hope to make this available on websites through UW Extension, as well as the county websites. Wisconsin Land and Water, who has been a big part of the project, will also hopefully have it on the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation website. So I would like just to kind of go through it a little bit. We called ourselves the Shoreline Stabilization Outreach Project, or SSOP. Again, it was, like I said, a subgroup of approximately 11 land conservation offices. Pat from UW Extension and Stacy with Department of Ag, DATCP. So this is kind of a little bit of an outline of just what is in the document, an introduction, as well as what lakeshore erosion is and what it means, and a self-assessment, a shoreline self-assessment that can be done to kind of guide you to what practice might be best fit for your shoreline. And we start out at different levels, as you can see, level 1 through 4. 1 being the least amount of impact or engineering. So like the no-mow native plantings, which as we state in the document too, is usually or always a part of any kind of project. But in some cases, it might be the only thing you need to do. So, and then it goes through a progression of other natural fiber products, such as the sediment logs or biologs that Stacy talked about, as well as log revetment or tree drops, fish sticks. And then the last course or level is the more hard engineering, which includes typically like riprap at the toe with bioengineering above it. So that's essentially what is in this this document. I'll kind of cruise back past the introduction, but this is the self-assessment that is a 2-page section that is basically a point system. You kind of score your shoreline based on all these different parameters, such as wave energy, soils, existing vegetation, impervious surfaces, and you're kind of ranking them. And the thought is that this is something that a homeowner can do, but you can also work with your land conservation office to help kind of guide you through this. We do say this is only a guide. This isn't necessarily a how-to manual, but more or less a guide to help you figure out what your options are, but ultimately seeking professional guidance to pursue with a project. So this is the essentially the assessment with a point system. You can see on the bottom 10 or less, 10 to 15, and then greater than 15 would be more of your hard armoring or engineering, or combination of hard armoring and bioengineering. The table is essentially showing you the different options that might be best suited based on what you're looking for. If maybe it's just habitat improvement, if that's an important aspect, that might be something you can look down through and see what best practice is suited for habitat, such as tree drops or fish sticks, if that's your main motivation. And then the next page is just explaining what are the different causes of lakeshore erosion, such as wind and wave action and energy, as well as ice push, and essentially an explanation is what's causing the lakeshore erosion. And just maybe the last few minutes, I'd like just to kind of show what the different practices are that we do outline. Like I said, then we kind of start out in levels, the first level being the no-mow and native plantings. So they all have a similar look to them. The hope was to kind of give you an illustration of what it would, essentially what it may look like, and then actually show pictures of either before, after, or during of actual projects. And you'll see some very familiar pictures from Stacy's presentation, because again, she's been doing this work for 20 years with the counties. So we do have a lot of projects to actually showcase and show that they have been successful over the years. So the different, again, this is just the different projects. The first one being no-mow. This one is more of the native plantings. The photo credits are all in the back of it, all in the back page of the document. In case you're wondering there, they're all northern primarily northern Wisconsin lakes, taken by either land conservation staff or Stacy. So again, illustration, a brief introduction of what the project or practice is, benefits, what its limitations are, as Stacy talked about with a biolog, concerns of ice and wave action and where it's maybe best suited for the site. And then, so these are this is the natural fiber section of the document. This is the natural fiber blocks. That's an option, which is a little bit bigger, different shaped from just essentially a biolog. Erosion matting. And this is a log revetment. And I know some people have asked about permitting. This is actually a project that we did on Middle Eau Claire Lake in Bayfield County, where we did use logs and we did get a DNR permit for this project. It was tamarack logs that were earth anchored into the shore with some riprap above and below the log. Tree drops and fish sticks. Again, you can see the familiarity between all the pages are very similar, trying to show what a project may look like on the ground, but also with illustrations. And then the last section kind of getting into more of the hard engineering or hard armoring in a combination of riprap and bioengineering. So that is essentially the last section. And you probably saw these photos from Stacy's talk earlier. Very similar, seeing the succession of the project. So as you can see, we kind of wanted to show what these projects can look like, that it's something that we can work on either with the counties, the county land conservation offices, with assistance with Stacy, and have information out there just so people can see what their options are. It's not always an answer of just putting rock on your shoreline. It may be that, but it also may be a combination of other things. So that's kind of what we wanted to essentially accomplish with this particular publication. So want to make sure we have enough time for questions. And then this is the matting section that Stacy was talking about, the synthetic matting. And yeah, as you can see, it's many pages. I believe it's actually a 24-page document. So if you guys are familiar with like the Rain Garden publication, it's kind of similar to that. And the group, the SSOP group, basically put all of the information together. We hired a professional illustrator to do the illustrations. And then Wisconsin Land and Water Association has a media outreach person that was basically a graphic designer. So they were able to make this document look appealing and hopefully be user-friendly. So they took our information and put it into this document. So like I said, this is kind of the back credits, who was involved and where the photos were taken and locations. You can kind of see, I'm going to leave this screen up for a little bit. You can see the members of the SSOP team that essentially put the document together. But yeah, lastly, I just want to say thanks, and I hope, unfortunately, we were really hoping to have this as a final product. And Pat, I know, wanted to be able to share the link. We're almost there. It's been a very long process, and having a pandemic in the middle of it too made it harder to basically meet and get this thing accomplished. But we feel pretty confident it will happen this summer. We have a printer lined up. We got a grant from Wisconsin DNR, a surface water grant, and we're awarded that. So we do have the funds to print this. We are just waiting on a couple of edits, and it will go to print. It will be distributed. The Wisconsin Land and Water Associations that are divided, I think there are 8 of them across the state. We have met with them over the course of the last 2 months, attending their meetings online, and they have all contributed funds to the printing of this document. So we have the budget, we have the money we need to print it. We basically were looking for the match that we needed from the DNR grant to get it printed, and we have that now. Wisconsin Valley Improvement Company has also made a contribution. So some of those credits are going to be added to this document as well. So there's been many partners in making this happen. So a link will be available. Maybe watch for it, and maybe Pat can say something too. Watch for it at UW Extension. Watch for it at Wisconsin Land and Water, or even your individual county websites. And then hopefully we'll have publications distributed throughout the state. So thank you.
Thank you, both Stacy and Travis, for that. We did have some questions that came in that we can start asking. So one question was, how does someone get a consultation about erosion or other issues as a homeowner that they might be having on their property? Pat did share some resources for the Wisconsin restoration contractors as well as the land and water departments, but what would you suggest as kind of a first step if you think you have issues?
I'll defer to Travis, but I work with all the county land conservation department folks. So primarily landowners will go to them. And so contacting your land conservation department would be how you would get to somebody like me to come out and do a site visit after the county evaluates if it's good for your program.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't know that I have anything more to contribute, but yes, definitely, reach out to the land conservation offices, and then Stacy basically becomes our resource at the county levels. So.
And I think each county is different as far as what they prioritize and what their staffing levels are. So that would be your first step to see kind of what you can, or what your county provides. That would be a very good first step.
That's a very good point, because not all counties work on lakeshore stuff. As you can see, just in my project description, we don't just work on lake shores either, and we don't have a very big staff. Most northern counties do not have a very large staff. They have a county conservationist and a technician. I happen to be the technician. I work on a lot of ag projects, as Madeline pointed out, and wetland restoration. So we kind of run the gamut on projects, and each county is different. So.
Yeah, so a good place to start, and the only other comment I would make is if there's a homeowner that's really in a time crunch or feels like there's some kind of urgency, you can start with the land conservation departments, but you might, I guess I'll say you might not be too encouraged to hear if you have to wait, in a waiting list, or if there's several homeowners in front of you, then you might need to be going to privately or finding something outside of that. But certainly a good starting point is land conservation offices.
All right, thank you. And that link for the directory is in the chat if you scroll up a little further. Another question that came in was that there is someone who has a naturally wooded shoreline, but the high water on a seepage lake with no outlet is undermining the root systems of various size trees. Our soils are sand with large stones, so the lake bottom has abundant rocks of 4 to 10 inches in diameter. Can I move rocks from the lake bottom, which have been eroded from the bank, to reinforce the exposed roots, or do I need a permit to do that?
I'm going to say that I believe you need a permit to do that, but being that Travis and I, neither of us are the regulators of that, I think that would be a question that you would pose to a DNR person, a DNR assigned staff at your county level.
Yep, Yeah, definitely always check, and we, just in this publication too, we flag a couple of spots where it says always check to see if you need a permit. Because I know there are exemptions out there now, but please do always check with county zoning and county zoning and DNR before you start, I would say, moving rock onto your shore or something like that. Sounds like a site that would definitely need an assessment or evaluation.
Okay, so I would think that your question also might be addressed in our next session as well, when we have our zoning and DNR permitting person on our panel. So you could bring that question to the next one too. One of the last questions I see is, where does one find geoblocks or logs in the Bayfield County area? And where are good sources for native plantings?
Travis, do you have some good?
I don't know about the geoblocks or log, maybe I don't.
Maybe the bags.
The bags. So there is a distributor. Envirolock is a brand name, or Agricol is the company the supplier that makes Envirolock bags. There is a northern distributor for that. I believe the company is out of just south of Madison, correct? Yeah, so it is a Wisconsin-based company, and then there are some distributors in the north. I believe there is one for sure in Rhinelander, and then I believe there's a new distributor out of Hayward for the Envirolock bags. And what was the other part of that question, Madeline?
So someone did throw in the comment about Brock White and Duluth can be another source for that material. But the second part is, where do you find good native plantings?
Oh, thank you. There are a couple, you can try to reach out to some of the local landscapers in the county because they do projects, or often will do the contract work for native plants. And I know they do some ordering. There is, I believe, a greenhouse in Barnes that also is a source for native plants. And I know she has done some ordering for plants too. There are not many, I'll say that, to get. For a lot of times, either a contractor that's doing the planting has to order them, or they have to get it from other areas. As far as a local source just in the county, the only one I'm aware of is in the town of Barnes.
Thank you. There's a couple other resources from the area that people are throwing in the chats. Thank you for that. And any other questions at this point? We have a few minutes left. If you want to throw them in the chat, please. Well, looks like we're getting some more good native plant sources for our general area, depending on where you're able to go. But without seeing any other questions, I just want to thank Stacy and Travis again. Please use your reaction buttons at the bottom of the screen to show your appreciation with either an applause or a thumbs up. And a big thank you again to all of our partners and sponsors who made this conference possible. And a reminder that there will be a follow-up survey sent to you via email, and we really